All right. Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. I have a special guest up here tonight, Jared Boyd, who will introduce us to the gospel truth, who was, believe it or not, a sub-label of Stax Records. And Vinyl Me Please is finally doing a reissue, and I was over the moon when I saw this because finally there will be a box set, and Gerard is the perfect person to talk about this because not on this project, but also on another project, he wrote the liner notes and knows all about the gospel label, which in many ways is sometimes forgotten. And I'm so happy, Jared, that you took the time to do this. And well, yeah, may you introduce yourself.
Yes, hi Nadine and everyone that's listening or watching. My name is Jared JB Boyd. I'm program manager at WYXR 91.7 FM here in Memphis. If you haven't been through Memphis to hear us on the FM radio, you can stream us. You can find us online at WYXR.org. I'm also the writer and co-host of Bill Street Caravan, a globally syndicated roots music show here in Memphis as well, and a writer and a journalist, a DJ, and just someone who I hope that I covet and create content that pushes Memphis music forward, whether that be soul, rock and roll, funk, blues, uh, electronic, whatever I can get my hands on that truly spreads the gospel, for lack of a better term, of this region that I grew up in. I went to college in, studied in, and have reported in. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow, very impressive.
Oh,
Doing a
bless.
lot of things.
Thank you so much.
And I saw your website. You met also some great people. So you're really into it. Absolutely.
I'm meeting Nadine today, so I must be doing all right.
Thank you. So, Jared, tell us something about the gospel truth. Where did it came from? Why was it even created, and where did it went?
Well, the gospel truth sort of comes from the ashes of a previous Stax subsidiary called Chalice Records. And, Al Bell, as he ascends to, he was originally sort of a head of sales and promotions in the Stax fabric. He was a former radio man. He knew the landscape of the black radio market from DC down so very well, and he knew that gospel is the cornerstone of a lot of the talents that come from the soul tradition. And so you see Al Bell as a champion of a group like the Staple Singers. He's sort of hitting on this idea of the sacred and the spiritual sort of merging as one, and was really the catalyst for a group like the Staple Singers, leaving that down home, very sacred music, and sort of incorporating the beat of the street that was going on in the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, the Black resistance movement in the Southern U.S. So, this same man, Al Bell, ascends from just being, a part of sales and promotions to kind of, becoming a de facto leader of Stax Records, as Jim Stewart and Estella Axton kind of take a back seat. And I think Estella Axton leaves the company completely. But, as Al Bell's leadership sort of continues post the dissolution of the Atlantic Records handshake deal that would effectively make them the distributor of Stax in the 1960s. Once that goes away, after the assassination of King, and definitely after the death of Otis Redding in a tragic plane crash, along with most of the Bar-Kays band, as Stax is rebuilding, Bell sort of reinvests in this idea. Formerly, there was a Chalice Records that was a part of the Stax family, and they put out a few gospel singles, but he goes sort of head first in a lot of different directions, incorporates more rock and roll, incorporates some spoken pieces on recording, but gospel sort of becomes this sort of pet project that he builds around. And to head up that project, he asked one of his heroes, Dave Clark, to become a part of the Stax family. And with Dave Clark as the sort of the leader of Gospel Truth, he also enlists Mary Peak Patterson, who was sort of a fixture locally in the gospel music tradition, as someone who was very present and someone who, you know, worked within churches here locally. And so they set out to, you know, make a label that really makes good on the promise of a group like the Staple Singers, by melding the funk and the rock and roll that Stax would become associated with, largely with the good word in the Bible.
Awesome. So one of the first groups, I think, which were signed to the Gospel Truth was the Rance Allen Group.
Yes.
I think it was one of the first ones. And what also was a thing, I love the concept, is that they try to get in the mainstream market with gospel and covering songs like Just My Imaginations from The Temptation and make it kind of a gospel thing to it. So
Yeah.
how, from your point of view, how successful was that concept?
You know, Rance Allen's was one of the most recognizable voices and faces in Black gospel music still today. And, you know, even people who aren't record collectors, people who may not know that they may not know his connection to Stax at all, people who may even just be casual fans of gospel music, even contemporary gospel music, would likely know Rance Allen if they're a fan of Black American gospel music. So I think on the larger arc, you know, there is probably no greater success than Rance Allen, and he's known for that incredible voice. He may not be as known for his guitar playing as he might be for just that register and the way that he could command any song that he was on. You know, it's almost funny to think of him as a revolutionary gospel act in the context of the 1970s, because, you know, most people my age grew up with him as a standard bearer for gospel music. And, you know, as you look at an artist like a Kirk Franklin, who, you know, again, in my day growing up was thought of as that sort of that same thing, that revolutionary mix of contemporary popular music with gospel. He blended hip hop and gospel, and many artists came after him doing that same thing. You know, Rance Allen was sort of a forefather to that concept. And I just can't imagine a better career in gospel for an artist like a Rance Allen, considering that the stakes for Black gospel, a lot of times some of these artists don't necessarily have the recognition that they deserve. You know, covering is rampant in that tradition, and, you know, a lot of times there is no compensation for someone, you know, taking your song and making it a hit within the church market, or traveling and performing another person's song. And sometimes you do a lot of concerts and gigs because of a relationship with a pastor, or because of a relationship with a gospel promoter, that, you know, it goes largely unreported how harsh the reality can be sometimes for people trying to make a living singing gospel music. So I would say, you know, Rance Allen had an incredible career, and I hope that he was incredibly proud of that career, because he's an incredible and very vital, you know, entry into the larger gospel story.
You mentioned the making a living on gospel. So from a business perspective, if you're a record label like Stax putting out gospel music, because it's a huge financial step, you have to pay the musicians, studio time was very, very expensive. You have the distribution part of everything. So it's, for me, it's more likely the love for the music and the culture to make it possible for all these singers to have a kind of platform to, or a studio to release their stuff, instead of saying, okay, this is not a thing, I know I'm going to make a ton of money with it.
Yeah, I'd agree. And, you know, you far be it for me to designate anyone's intentions when it comes to music, but the reality is, you know, a lot of people do it because they are truly led by the Spirit, and some people do it because they have an incredible gift and they just don't know anything other than to share that gift. And some people do enjoy fame, and you know, fame within the structure of a church is charged in a whole different set of rules. And so, it's an interesting culture, interesting tradition, and, talented or not, it can be a doozy to be popular within the framework of a church tradition. And the temptations are similar to rock and roll as well. So,
correct.
you got to be careful.
Yeah, correct. I have a ton of gospel records from the 70s, and I do have also a little gospel segment on my channel, because there are some great gospel records out there. Have a tremendous beat, and the vocal on it just mind-blowing. But most of these times, these recordings just sound absolutely terrible, because they weren't recorded in a professional environment. Sometimes it was just a reel-to-reel recording tape, but the music was just phenomenal. And what I love so much about the gospel truth is that these artists for the first time had the opportunity to go into professional studios, having the professional musicians, the best equipment available at that time to release their music. So the music we are getting is very, very high quality from the material, but also audio-wise.
I think that there was a Stax standard. My understanding is that Dave Clark purchased tapes, records that would have been shelved otherwise, or had just been sitting without any takers. And, like Al Bell, Dave Clark was a record guy. He promoted throughout the entire U.S. And at the time that the Gospel Truth was operating, he was sort of based in the Detroit area. And so a lot of these records come from the Detroit area. Young people who would have won talent shows in that area, or would have just been the talk of all the church communities, who would have made that circuit in the Midwest, caught his attention. And, he had that ear, and he was trained to promote and trained to go after tapes that probably, would have been a bit closer to the Stax standard of that time. And, he was looking for a certain sound, a sound that would be effectively hip and notably hip, in an opportunity to hopefully cross some of these artists over to the young, forward-minded, forward-thinking Black consumer, and with consideration to the very real fact that, there's only so many degrees of separation from the politician, the pimp on the street corner, the beautician, the barber, the lawyer, the Black professional, and the preacher, and the music director, and the person in the church choir, or the student, or the protester. There's only so many degrees of separation. A lot of these people may be out in the club on a Saturday night, and in the pew on a Sunday morning. And so there is a complete crossover between the intentions of all those consumers. And I think that if I could speak for Al Bell, and I can't, but if I could get into his mind, and if I could at least make a judgment as someone who is examining this music several decades down the line, I would say that, beyond just the gospel, the straight ahead soul, the leanings into funk, and sort of the staging, sort of proto disco that would have come from Stax. When you look at a record like Theme from Shaft, is way ahead of the curve in that sense, as far as club music would be concerned at the end of that decade. But also, at this time, Stax was recording speeches, and Stax was recording comedy records. And so I think that they were trying to create a diverse catalog and a diverse showcase of all instances of Black existence and Black life, Black entertainment, Black spirituality, Black theoretical thought. And, I think they even did a good job of making some notable pop and rock records for audiences that didn't exist within that Black community.
Why do you think Motown didn't take the opportunity to do that? You mentioned Detroit. It would have been very easy to get these groups in Studio A.
Yeah. Well, I certainly am in no way a Motown scholar, because there's so much to dig into with Stax. But my understanding is that they did do some similar things. Again, recording speeches. Dr. King, they recorded. They did record some gospel acts, and I think that the style was just different. And my understanding of what was going on in Detroit at the time was there was so much music to go around, and that Motown was so committed to their assembly line that it would take a lot to break that mold. And if you didn't fit that mold, there's a lot of talent that was left on the table at Motown that ended up at Stax. Everything from a producer like Don Davis to a group like the Dramatics. A lot of their talent. Kim Weston became a part of the Stax family after previously being affiliated with Motown. So, I think Stax had a lot to overcome in the way of the perception that a small, largely Black operated, company making records in Memphis, Tennessee, effectively to the rest of the world, they may not have been hip to the fact that we weren't riding on horses, and that there was some upward mobility for Black people in this area to be able to be in the entertainment business. And so I think Stax had a lot to prove to people in the way of making a statement that we aren't Bamas and Hicks, and that we can make so-called sophisticated music, because the idea was that we play the blues down here, and the same Black people who lived in Detroit were cousins of folks who lived in Mississippi and all that, because of the Great Migration. Detroit is, as we say down here, is just Mississippi with coats. So I think that there was an aversion to anything that aligned itself with Southernness, because Black people are rising out of the cotton fields and into the car manufacturer. And so there was an intellectual abandonment of anything that felt like the rural reality that is very much in and around Memphis, but was not of Stax for sure.
Do you know, or have you any information if the label was financially stable to pay off itself, so that it won't be money needed from Stax?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. Do you know if the Gospel Truth was so successful that it could pay his own bills or their own bills, or that did it need money from Stax to keep the label going?
Yeah, my understanding of the Gospel Truth was that it was not an overwhelming success, or that the Gospel Truth didn't necessarily add a lot financially to the framework, or the tapestry that was occurring at Stax. And Stax really didn't last much longer. If the Gospel Truth was founded in 1972, Stax would shutter its doors in 1975. So this is really a short window of time and truly an experiment. But I do think that they were able to sustain themselves on one factor, and is that Dave Clark was sourcing these tapes, that they weren't really incurring a lot of recording costs by making new gospel product. I think that it was more of an opportunity for someone to scout talent and A&R and sort of develop touring groups, so they were able to put some of these artists on the road, but they largely were already pretty developed as gospel acts on their own. I mean, Rance Allen's, one single that, prior to his signing with Stax sounds pretty much like where he ended up anyway. He kind of already was pretty fully formed, he and his brothers. Definitely the same with the Christian Tabernacle Choir, Reverend Maceo A. Woods in Chicago, Illinois, was already a thing that was happening, already a kind of a household name for those who were into Black gospel at the time, a large choral group, very highly esteemed already. So, a lot of these were community choirs, or just soloists and solo acts that, already kind of had their thing, except for, with a few exceptions.
So why do you think that after 1975, after the fatal Atlantic deal, which actually brought Stax down, why do you think nobody picked it really up and continue it? Because of
Well,
the financial
so
aspect?
I'm sorry to cut you off. You had some more.
No.
Well,
Was it
so
was
that handshake deal dissolves somewhere in 1968, 1969, and Stax goes through a bevy of sort of different ownership structures. Uh, you know, the Stax so effectively you're dealing with two separate catalogs. Everything that would have been published and distributed prior to that handshake deal being dissolved between Jim Stewart and Atlantic Records, uh, and Jim Wexler at Atlantic Records, sort of becomes a part of the Atlantic family. They hold on to that. So Sam and Dave was already an Atlantic artist. They were kind of on loan to Stax, but all of that music, that early Isaac Hayes album, you know, most of the Carla Thomas stuff had already happened at that point. Like William Bell, Eddie Floyd, so effectively from that point on, Stax has no catalog. I mean, none of the Otis Redding stuff, happens in that latter period of Stax. But in that latter period of Stax, the soul explosion happens. And so, the big breakout hit record from them completely starting over, putting out like 29 albums all at once just to get their name back out into the marketplace without Atlantic being attached, is Isaac Hayes' Hot Buttered Soul, his second record, which propels Stax into its next period. When by the time they shuttered their doors in 1975, which Hot Buttered Soul would have been 69, 1975, it's not long before I believe it is Fantasy bought the latter catalog of Stax, and briefly begins to put out new music under the Stax moniker, and then later Volt would even have a sort of a short-lived revival in the late 80s and early 90s. And I'm not 100% sure when that catalog would have eventually become a part of the Kraft and Concord family. But that Stax brand was out there in several iterations in the late 70s, during the disco period and the sort of huge boom of funk, which would have been after all of the huge hits that we know Stax for. And it had a moment in the 80s as well. So it enters the lexicon every decade or so. And I think Motown has largely done the same. Now the difference is Motown is a part of the Universal music family, and they have carried it on as a heritage brand in a way that no one has truly done with Stax.
From the Gospel Truth catalog, what's your favorite album?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's probably Whatever Happened to Love, because it's the only one that was recorded here locally. It's sort of similar to some of the music that was coming out from We Produce Records, which was another subsidiary of Stax, with Tom Nixon and Josephine Bridges at the helm of that project. And it definitely has a groove that's similar to Lou Bond's Lou Bond record, which came out on We Produce. And it just has that lush sort of string arrangement that is emblematic of the other records that are, a part of that period of Stax's in-house production. But also really, outside of the box set that we've done with Vinyl Me Please, I love Message to the Ghetto. Was another great one. I love the Blue Aquarius record. It's strange and it's wild and it's completely out there, and it has nothing to do with Black gospel at all. Why it was on Gospel Truth, not 100% sure. It is more aligned with sort of Eastern philosophy and that sort of thing. But there are a lot of gems, and I love Rance Allen, and I really, truly adored the opportunity to interview him right as the pandemic was sort of crippling the globe. We got to talk on the phone, and as far as I know, it was his last interview before his passing, and so I'm truly honored that he could be as the star of any Gospel Truth collection, that he could be honored in the first definitive singles collection that we did, and that his work and his legacy will continue to be illuminated through these subsequent Gospel Truth projects.
I'm happy that they did the Lewis McCord tribute to Mahalia Jackson.
Well, that Gotta Get a Move On is one of my favorite songs within the Gospel Truth catalog, and it's written by Betty Crutcher, who recently just passed away, and an incredible, beautiful songwriter. And as far as I can tell from those who knew her, from photos that I've seen, from things I've read about her, was just an incredibly beautiful human being, and a true pioneer for women in the soul tradition. And so for that reason, I also love that Louise McCord record.
Well, the records are somehow out there, but and I saw them in a couple of record stores, but they're beaten up as hell. So they've been played. It was I wanted to buy some. They were very cheap, but you couldn't play them. It was impossible. And so I'm so happy that this reissue has been done. May you tell us a little bit how the cooperation you're working with Vinyl Me Please happened?
Yeah, I did the liners for Frederick Knight's I've Been Lonely for So Long with Vinyl Me Please back in 2020, I believe it was. And so I just have been in the Vinyl Me Please system, and I've been waiting to hear from them about a new project. I've been hanging back. There were a couple conversations that happened about some projects that haven't necessarily gotten licensed. Hopefully that they'll call me again when it's time for those to happen. Particularly those that honor Memphis and the music that I deal with here every day. But they reached out about this box set. Andrew at Vinyl Me Please reached out, and I thought, gosh, I'm going to jump back into the gospel thing again. I might end up a minister by the time I'm done writing all these things about gospel truth. But I was glad to do it. And, everyone that I worked with on the previous collection, the singles collection for Craft, also, gave me their blessing, and they were excited that we could get this collection done well, because it truly is important to continue to highlight all the many things that Stax was a part of, from the Watt Stax film to helping to launch the career of Richard Pryor, all of these little things and connections and curiosities that even I find new things all the time that I had no idea that people at Stax were a part of. And if you just know Hold On, I'm Coming, or if you just know Theme from Shaft, or you just know Mr. Big Stuff, or I'll Take You There, you'll lose sight of just the day-to-day creativity of and the reach of this what was a mom and pop label in Memphis, Tennessee, and particularly the Black men and women who were able to have such a huge global impact and see global music reflect its pure and its unique qualities back at them, and I think that conversation continues to sort of unfold and unpack unexpected nuggets all the time.
Who choose the album for the box set?
I'm not sure. They just threw them at me, and I said, I'm ready.
Okay. Have you already seen the box set? Do you have already a copy?
You'd be surprised. I didn't know when the street date was or that it was ready to roll until you reached out to me. That was the first I'd heard about it since I turned it in. So I'm excited to hear it's coming out. Then you made me look it up, and I saw, okay, for sure, it's coming out.
Yeah, I think mid-May, or I think around mid-May. I don't have the exact date, but I think it's in around a month.
Well, I can't wait to hold it in my hands. Every time I do a project like this, I have an outer body experience to as a record collector, to open up a record and to see my name, associated with the press materials, to feel it, and to see the hype sticker with my name on it, and to be able to share with my friends this tactile thing, like, hey, I was a part of this. So apparently there's only going to be 1,000 copies of this box set. I can't wait to hold it in my hands. It really means a lot, and I get chills thinking about potentially someone who looks like me, who lives in my community, 20 years down the line, finding a box set, in a record store somewhere and saying, man, who is this guy, JB, and how did he get to be a part of this? Because that's how I got into records, was just imagining having those conversations with everyone who's a part of the record, everyone who was in the liner notes. And so that drives me.
Wow, yeah. Vinyl Please is doing great box sets. So some people complaining about the price and all of this, but I have to say this, in the last couple of years, the reissues they've been done, they're just fantastic. And also the box sets are just fantastic, from the design layout to the quality of the vinyl to the quality of the mastering. I mean, Ryan K. Smith is doing the mastering. It's an all analog change. So this is fantastic. What I think is a little sad, it's, as you mentioned, it's just 1,000.
Yeah.
I wish they would have done more, because I think today there are way more people out there who are getting into gospel music, who love gospel music. And as you also mentioned, it was like not the old school gospel, as I want to call it. It was funky tunes in it. There was some fresh vibes added to it. So I think it's sad that just 1,000.
Hey, we'll have to hope for more on the next project that we do.
I can't wait to hear what the next project might be. All right. So do you have, next to the Gospel Truth, a favorite gospel record out of Memphis where you say, people, this is a record you absolutely need to hear?
I find weird gospel records all the time from artists from Memphis. I'm at my desk now here at the radio station WYXR, and I'm looking over. I'm sure I could pull 2 or 3 very strange ones out. But yeah, there's a few. Oh yeah, Robbie is here, Robbie Grant, and there's quite a few. All right, we'll do that then.
Yeah, please.
Well, I first want to shout out Pastor Juan D. Ship, who is a DJ here at our radio station, and he's he didn't record a lot of albums. He records sermons to LP, but his 45s have done incredibly well for his. They've revived his label. Fat Possum is, Big Legal Mess is distributing reissues and compilations from his original label, which was Divine Spirituals, but also they've revamped the label. They've created a new label in sort of the spirit of his previous label called Bible Entire, and he's back to producing incredible gospel music. So I have to shout out to him because he's certainly a pioneer. One of my favorites that's here, and I think it's been reissued, is Candle Tribes, Nothing But a Feeling. This is really more of an EP or a 12-inch single than it is a full album, but it's an incredibly funky, synthy, strange record by a local guy named Andre LaFlora, who's recorded under a few different monikers. And I also...
What year was that, Jared?
What's that? What year?
What year?
87.
Mm-hmm.
87. Here's a strange one from a young fellow named Adrian Davis called He's Everywhere. I couldn't not grab. It's probably the cutest kid I've ever seen.
You needed to buy this record just because of the cover itself.
Absolutely. And I think one more strange one that is in this group of records. I'll give a shout out to Fannie Clark Singers. I think they're from West Memphis originally, but they recorded here. This one was recorded by Willie Mitchell at Royal Studios. But another strange cover I found here. You caught me on a good day with a lot of gospel. We got the Townsend Sisters and the Meadowlarks, some other cool synthy gospel, but there's one in here that I know. Oh, well, here's another great one. Divinity, a group that was produced by Lee Moore. Lee Moore, an incredible local synthesizer master. Not quite sure what led him to put out a gospel group, but I'm glad that he did. It also has some recording work from a friend of the station, Lester Snell. There's one called, I can't find it, but there's one called Can Anything Good Come From the Ghetto? And I just think that's an incredible record too. So that's just a few that I had laying right here. And I think that about sums up how some of my favorite. I actually had a few of my favorites right here in arm's reach.
Wow, I'm jealous. I'm so jealous. Really, it's so difficult up here in Europe getting those gospel records. There's one gospel record I'm showing you. I'm totally in love with that. That's the Paul Burroughs Gospel Choir.
Amazing. Well, where are they based? Where were they from?
Yeah, that's difficult. Most of these records, it's Los Angeles.
Okay.
This is the back, and I got this for $30, and it was recorded with one mic on a reel-to-reel tape. It's the worst sounding record I have in my collection, but this is the music is just phenomenal from the beginning to the end.
Wow, I'll be on the lookout for that one, and then maybe we can send some stuff back and forth.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Really, it's I'm really the Cosmopolitan Church of Prayer Choir did some amazing stuff, and that's why I was so over the moon that finally gospel music is getting reissued on a major label like Vinyl Me Please.
Awesome.
So that's very important. Gospel music is very important for the soul.
Absolutely. And I love reading the names of the people in the choir, seeing if I know anyone related to any of these folks, which is fun.
Yeah. And it's so difficult getting information about this because usually they recorded one album, there's only the tape left, you have absolutely zero information, so you could never really ask what's the story behind it, or praise the singers on it and give them credit to their recordings. And that's the sad part, but that's why I think it's so important to bring the gospel music out there.
Absolutely.
Gerard, thank you so much for your time.
Nadine, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to continuing to chat, and thanks for your support, and I hope you enjoy the collection that comes out.
Yeah, I can hardly wait. Honestly, I can hardly wait for that.
Likewise.